You're muted. There.
Thank you, Charlie, for your junk folder talk. It's a nice metaphor. Reminds me of most of my brain. So, are there any questions this morning? Any kind of question is okay. Practicing Zen, Buddhism.
I have a question.
Okay.
When observing children, we found that oftentimes children seems to be more joyful than adults.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So I was wondering, do we born with the before thinking mind that we can pay attention to everything that happens in the moment? But through growing up and education and life experience, we lost that before thinking mind. And now through practice, are we trying to get back what we used to have?
Right.
Can we say something about that?
Yeah. So the child's mind is one metaphor that's used in some contexts as the enlightened mind because it's it isn't burdened the way child's minds, like you just mentioned, tend to be less burdened by habit or bad experiences or something, and they're more playful. At least they act playful, and they're more intuitive because they don't always have all the conceptual frameworks that we use as adults to analyze and control and manage things. So that kind of playful childlike mind is actually a metaphor for the enlightened mind, which isn't attached to anything. So, but it's just a metaphor. In fact, Charlie was talking about, words and speech aren't it. So that's because, and that's one reason we use the word don't know. But don't know doesn't mean I don't know. Don't know means your mind before thinking, your intuitive mind, the mind that's free from your likes and your dislikes and your misconceptions about yourself. Okay? Any other questions? Well, Zen Master Sung Sung, our founding teacher, would say that a child is interesting because they're very close to this kind of don't know thing. The problem is they don't have wisdom. So as you grow up, how can you grow up and not lose your spontaneity and your intuitive self and yet gain wisdom? So that's one of the purposes of practicing, because those experiences can be digested and become wisdom. So even the bad things, right? Like now we're all experiencing the COVID thing. So you'll notice that COVID has really bad results, right? Like your grandmother dies or whatever. It's used for all kinds of things, even for political ends. But then there's also a good side to the COVID thing in that it's kind of like our teacher, right? So the Buddha's original teacher were old age, sickness, and death. So you'll notice the middle of those three words is sickness. So that comes in all different styles. So one of them is the COVID-19 thing. I used to live in Hong Kong, and we had COVID there too, the earlier version of this COVID. So everybody's freaked out, but they survived it. Hong Kong is very organized, and they could deal with it on a medical front. But still, a lot of people died, and but it had a result in that it taught the Hong Kong people something about this, you know. So when it happens to them again, COVID-19 is just another version of that SARS virus. Then they have some wisdom about how to deal with it and what they can do. So this will be like that too. Also in terms of experiencing what we call transience. So everything is always coming and going, right? You don't actually get anything because everything's coming and going. In fact, old age, sickness, and death means coming and going, right? So if you don't die of this, you'll die of that, right? For sure. I don't know which one it'll be, but that'll happen. So that experience gives you wisdom that a young child doesn't have. Although they are spontaneous, they have a Buddha nature. We can also be spontaneous and we have Buddha nature too. It's just that it's kind of clouded over, kind of like clouds cover the sun by our desire and anger mind. So it's just about letting go of that. You don't actually get anything, you just return to what was already there. You know, you don't, language is kind of deceptive, but you don't get the sun when the clouds go away because the sun was already there, shining. Of course, it only appeared about 5 billion years ago, and in another 5 billion years, it's also going to go away. And when it's supernovas, it's going to be bigger than the orbit of Mars, which might include us in a big fireball, maybe. So everything's always coming and going. Whether SARS ends your life, climate change, or falling out of a chair drunk and hitting your head on the kitchen floor. It happens many different ways, but that's just coming and going, coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. So that's why we try to return to what we originally are, which is before thinking mind, which we call don't know mind, which means the mind that's not attached to anything. So that doesn't exclude thinking, it just, you detach from the thinking, you let go of it. And then it can serve its real function, which is the way that human beings operate in this world. So you can use that to help the world. So that's COVID's wonderful gift for us. It's not very pleasant, but it is instructive. Any other questions?
I have a question for you.
Sure, please.
Are you going to come to Midwest Sangha weekend in
Sure.
May? Yay! All right.
I have a computer, so I'll be there.
We are going to have it. It is going to be hybrid. Hopefully, we can have it, and it will be hybrid. We've figured out
Okay,
how
good.
to do
I hope
that.
it's hybrid. Who knows where we'll be in May?
Museum.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Kwang Sunim, this question isn't, well, I'll leave it to you to make of the question what you do. But I'm wondering about your experience in teaching and supporting different sanghas worldwide during this time, since you were speaking about the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm curious about your perspective on how quantum practitioners are meeting the challenges of COVID in similar ways or in different ways in different places around the world. Do you have any thoughts you'd like to share about that?
Well, yeah, I teach all around the world. See, the interesting thing about Buddhism is it's called a universal religion. It's not really a religion, but it's, and it fits in and it travels all around the world. But there's many religions like that. So when these religions encounter different cultural contexts, right? So there's the Lawrence, we're in Lawrence, Kansas. There's the Lawrence cultural context. And then if you live out in Western Kansas, there's a Western Kansas cultural context. And then when you go to our Zen Center, where my actual address is in Berkeley, it's a little different than Manhattan, Kansas, or something in Berkeley. So whether you're in Hong Kong or Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or wherever, there'll be a particular cultural context. And even for Buddhism, when Buddhism travels from India to China, it has to adapt to a particular cultural context. So yeah, those things are different. Like I've lived the last 8 years in Singapore. So one of the interesting thing is most of us, not all of us obviously, but most of us are used to this kind of like Christian, Western Christian kind of cultural context. But when you move to Singapore, suddenly you're living in a Confucian society. I mean, I talk to people in Singapore all the time, and they're always asking me questions about Christianity because then they know nothing about it, like zero, So that's kind of interesting. But if you're going to help people, and if you have clear teaching, the way Buddhism and Zen does, you have to adapt to that kind of thing. So you also know that there's Japanese Zen, and in Japanese Zen, there's even different kinds of Zen. There's Rinzai and Soto. And then there's Korean Zen, and there's Chinese Zen, and blah, 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 blah. It goes on forever. Even in Korean Zen, there's only one kind officially. So, but there's always all these different contexts. So you have to figure out how to massage the teaching so it teaches the people in that cultural context in an effective manner. You get the point across somehow. So when I'm talking to Singaporean people, so most of them are Hokkien Chinese. So Hokkien Chinese are they might be different than people from northern China who tend to be in a kind of a Mandarin language context, So these Hokkien people are from southern China, so they think quite a bit different. So it's our job as practitioners of Zen to fit into all these different situations so that you can help people. So if I'm speaking to somebody from Kansas, I'll say different things than when I'm speaking to Hokkien Chinese in Singapore. But Buddha's teaching is universal, so it can fit into any context, and it does. Look, it goes to Tibet, it goes all over the place. And it usually gets some of the cultural elements of where it moves attached to it. So when it moves to China, it absorbs Confucianism and Taoism and things like that, and so that changes its style. But the back behind meaning, what we might call the dono meaning, is the same, because that part isn't dependent on culture. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I was just thinking about being back here and stuck because of COVID. So I just kind of like, I've lived so long now in Asia that I just kind of become Asian. Then I come back here and oh God, white people, look at their noses. Their noses are so big. And then I look in the mirror and I know, wait, I'm one of those people. I'm one of those big nose people. So that kind of stuff, that's going on all the time as you move around. Anyway, you don't want to attach to that stuff. You have to figure out how to use it to help the people that you're dealing with in the moment, right? So that can be interesting, or it can be frustrating, or it can be whatever. One thing that shocked me about being in Singapore is suddenly I was around Theravadan monks all the time. So, I'm in a Korean tradition, so we dress much different than Theravadan monks. But at the Zen Center there, we'll have maybe 15 or 20 Theravadan monks come for lunch every Sunday, because Theravadan monks still have a begging tradition. And they're always asking me about my clothes, like, why are you wearing those weird clothes? In my mind, I'm thinking, why are you wearing those weird clothes? That's kind of funny. But, most Americans are, some are, but most Americans are not used to being around Theravadan monks. I certainly wasn't. I was mostly around Zen monks and Zen Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism and Korean Buddhism, like that. But, there's plenty of people practicing in the Theravadan tradition. So anyway, your native wisdom should be able to pop up, bring up some skillful means to deal with all those kinds of different situations. Hopefully. That's why we practice. You might even be able to start helping yourself. Any other questions? Oh, wait, that's blah, blah, blah through the whole time here. So, I could take one really quick question. No?
Why do you wear those weird clothes?
Exactly. I was wondering that myself when I was putting them on, looking in the mirror this morning. Yeah, these are a technique, right? So usually, like when we're practicing, whether we're lay or monastic, we wear these clothes. We don't do it so much online. And they're a kind of, they also are a kind of technique, So we'll chant in particular ways, we'll wear particular clothes. But it's always about the behind meaning of them, So these indicate somebody that's left home, supposedly. So you can think about that literally, like you leave home. Or it has a bigger meaning, of course. It means letting go of your attachment mind and returning to your original mind. So they kind of represent that. And there's all different kinds of styles of them. Korean monastic clothes are cool. We as lay people in the Quantum School of Zen wear them in the United States. But if you go to our Zen Center in Singapore, you won't see a Dharma teacher wearing a Dharma teacher robe, because it kind of grates on them culturally. But, you just use it for whatever the circumstance is to help people. So it's kind of like it's kind of like a military uniform, actually. Indicates who's who. And hopefully whoever that who is behaving in a helpful and compassionate manner towards all beings. Okay, that's enough. Thank you all for coming and practicing.